Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is going to talk to us about surviving a narcissistic and abusive relationship. So, guest, if you would, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Faith, and thank you again so much for having me on your show and sort of giving me the platform to share my story. I am a social worker, trauma-informed care, and I'm also a recovery coach for people who have been in toxic, abusive relationships. I specialize in post-narcissistic stress disorder, and I think it's a very, very not well-known thing, the abuse that it entails and exactly what a narcissist is. So it has become my mission to inform and educate people to look out for the red flags. And by sharing my experience, my hope is to help at least one person get out of these narcissistic abusive relationships.
So, I want to actually stop there. I know as we were talking before I started recording that I'm well familiar with a narcissistic relationship and what a narcissist is and what they look like, but not everybody is. So, do you want to give us like a nutshell version of what is a narcissist, and then we can kind of get into later what to look for after you tell us about what you went through, but what actually is narcissism? What is it?
So it's classified by individuals who have enormous egos. They require constant praise and adoration. They have zero empathy. They have no remorse. They are extremely calculating and manipulating, and they will do whatever it takes to make themselves feel in control and empowered. And everybody else is below them, and they are the smartest, greatest humans in the world. And people just don't truly understand how much darker it goes than that.
Yeah, no, you're hitting triggers in my brain right now. So, like I was like, oh yeah, there's that. So tell us a bit about, I think was it your husband that you were with? Yeah, of your kind of relationship you were in. So tell us a bit about this relationship and kind of what did you not see that you eventually did see, and what caused you to leave?
So I was able to get out 2 years ago, but we were together for 4 years. And at the beginning, he was just the most amazing man. Like he was just so loving and doting and genuinely cared about me and my opinions and my needs and sort of put me on a pedestal. And I was just, wow, this is my person. I want to spend the rest of my life with him. And we had a son together. And then very, very slowly, he started to change. It was like Jekyll and Hyde. Like he went from caring me about me to like constantly putting me down and degrading. And if I had an opinion that wasn't the same as his, I would get the silent treatment for days, or I would just get this rage and wrath and tongue lashings. And everything I did was wrong. I was broken. I was a joke. I was mentally ill. It was just terrible. Um, and it would seemingly come out of nowhere sometimes. And then he became extremely controlling and possessive to the point where I just stopped doing anything for myself, like going to yoga classes or hanging out with friends, because the wrath just wasn't worth it to me anymore. So I became extremely isolated, and my self-worth was just completely non-existent towards the end. He just bulldozed over any boundary I had, and he just made me feel so worthless. And I didn't realize how slowly he was eroding me. It was like the frog in the boiling water. You know, you put a frog in the water, you slowly turn up the heat, and by the time they realize they're boiling, it's too late.
So what was the final thing, I mean, or series of things that finally got you to say, I gotta go. I gotta get out of this?
Well, I could no longer show up for my boys. I was like a shell of who I was. And then he started to give me weird, like sinister comments. Like he would tell me to be careful what I drank because at any moment he could put eye drops in my drink. And I had no idea what that meant. And then, like a week later, I was watching an episode of Dateline, and the host told a story about how this woman ended up killing her husband by putting eye drops in his drink
Wow.
because eye drops is they're a blood constrictor, but if ingested, it suppresses everything inside. Like it'll eventually slow down your breathing, slow down your heart rate, and you pass away. And he would just hide like the keys to my car sometimes. If we had been in an argument, he was controlling every aspect. I didn't come to find out until later that there were hidden video cameras all over the house.
Mm.
He had a GPS tracker on my car, that he was reading my text messages, my email history. Just, it was insanity, utter insanity. And then the gaslighting was over the top. And it drives me nuts when people just throw the word gaslighting out. It's like become a buzzword,
Mhm.
but it is really, really real. And I thought I was losing my mind. Like, for example, if I would leave my phone in one room and I'd come back and it was gone, and I'd ask him if he had seen it anywhere, and he said no. I'd searched the whole house. I'd come back and my cell phone was right where I knew I left it. And
Mhm.
he would say, see, you're severely having a mental break, you're losing it, you need help. And so I started to question myself. I started to think, oh my gosh, he's right. And because I'm such an empath and care so much about people, it was beyond my comprehension that somebody could be that evil, that it took me a long time to finally realize exactly who he was.
Yeah. And to get out for not only your sake, but your kid's sake too. So your youngest was 4, right? At that time, the little
He
one?
was 3, and
Yeah.
a lot of people stay in relationships for the children, but conversely, we need to get out for the children.
Yeah.
Like they're so moldable, and we need to build the foundations of their life like on steady grounds. And my son had developed a stutter
Mhm.
because of the anger and the abuse that he was witnessing. And that's when I started to realize, like, I need to derive the strength for him to finally break free.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from women, especially where the final thing is, I got to do this for my kids, right? It's like my kids are important, and they forget. Well, you're pretty flippin' important too, but the kids are the ones that drive us to do that. So I would add to that as well. Kids, especially as they're growing up, little kids, they're learning about relationships by what they see in their parents and so on too. So the role model thing is, do we want that kid to grow up to become, like his dad, or to meet someone like his dad, and you know what I'm saying, those kind of things where it's like those used to terrify me when I was in a bad relationship, is, oh, what are my kids learning from this, and how can I help them not learn that or unlearn that if that's the case. So
Yeah.
at what point in time, I know once you were out, were you already working as a social worker during that time, or did that something you started up after you left them?
No, I've been a social worker for 20 years and I focused on trauma.
Okay.
But then once I went through this experience, I've completely focused on being a recovery coach
Mhm.
for people in or getting out of narcissistically abusive relationships. And now I also educate law enforcement, judicial systems, emergency responders on the signs, because domestic violence isn't just physical. It involves coercive control, which has now been added to the definition of domestic violence, which is amazing because based on that, people can now get restraining orders, even if they physically haven't been abused, which is amazing. And which is what saved me when I escaped from my narcissist at 3 in the morning with my son.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that as well, because that's news to me. I didn't realize. I thought you had to be physically in fear of something, not even stuff, but just physical person's stuff to get a restraining order. So that's good to know. So you wrote a book. Tell us a bit about your book. And we'll get a link to it in the podcast notes for your episode so that people can find it as well. But tell us about your book.
So after I got out and I was able to find my own home, I had a lot of emotions that I needed to unpack. So one day I just started writing. I didn't set out to write a book, but just putting it down on paper was very therapeutic and empowering. And I thought, wait a minute, people need to know. Like, it sucks that I had to experience this. Like, I didn't set out to be abused by a narcissist, but because of my experience, I can help and educate other people and let them see that there is hope, there is a way to get out, and you can thrive. So my book recounts all of my ugly stories, my terrible, ugly stories that unless you've been through it, you could never understand it. I have a ton of information about what narcissistic personality disorder is, what the abuse is. I have a bunch of resources and information that I feel like after people have read this book, they will feel like they have their PhD in narcissism.
Yeah. So we'll get it. I want to hear about how you're coaching and helping people, but I mean, you mentioned some of the what narcissism really is, but what if I'm in that relationship, how do I recognize that? I mean, I'm just, especially if someone's like the gaslighting, making me think I'm crazy or I'm stupid or something. How do I realize, this actually is not healthy. This is not a good relationship, and it's time for you to think about, moving out.
Well, I think first of all, we always need to trust our intuition and our gut. And if something does not feel right, then it isn't.
Yeah.
If people are constantly degrading us and putting us down and aren't there for us when we need them and their actions don't match their words, that's a huge deal. Like, we need to be with somebody who's our cheerleader and makes us feel safe. And if you stop feeling like yourself and like you're compromising yourself, then those are all red flags
Yeah.
that it's time to get out. And it is our God-given right to live happy, peaceful lives and to be loved unconditionally. And anything else is just simply unacceptable. And we need to learn to love ourselves, which has taken me a long time. But once we love ourselves and have self-worth, we're able to put up strong boundaries, because in essence, we teach people how to treat us, right? So if we put up with abuse, we're going to continue to get abused.
Yeah. Yeah. I also would like to kind of, for anybody who's listening, who maybe has a friend or a family member that's in such a situation. I know, in my case, I did have people would come to me and say, "Hey, do you recognize what's going on here?" And I'm grateful for them for doing that, because I thought I was stupid and crazy. But
Mhm.
if someone was listening and they have, like, a good friend, a neighbor, a sister, whatever, a coworker that is in one of these relationships, and what could you say? What would you recommend they say that's not, I mean, I don't want to get right up in your face, business coworker, but I can see this is happening and I'm concerned for you, or how would you advise someone in that area?
Well, that's very tricky because in my situation, my friends and family would tell me, you're not in a healthy relationship, you're being abused. So I would get defensive and
Mhm.
sort of cut them out of my life because I was like, they don't know what they're talking about. But deep down, I knew. Um, I would say to broach that topic very, like in a very fragile way,
Mhm.
um, and maybe try to convince them to do some research. That's how I finally accepted it. One of my friends told me the term narcissistic personality disorder. And again, I've been a social worker and I had no idea what it was or what it entailed. And so I did a lot of research and I Googled and I listened to podcasts, and it was just so creepy the way that everything delineated the narcissist that I was in a relationship with and the abuse and what I was going through. And It took me a long time to finally accept that that's who he was, and who I fell in love with never even actually existed. That I think has been the hardest takeaway. At the same time, it was very liberating to put a label on it and realize I'm not crazy after all.
Mhm.
It's not me, it's him.
Yeah.
And again, I think just do not be judgmental with your loved ones. Just provide them with love, and just let them like bear witness to what they've gone through, and just validate them and provide like a safe place for them to tell you what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's great advice. So I'm gonna guess mostly women that you work with, or do you have male clients as well? Mostly women?
I work mostly with women. That's what I can relate to.
Because
Um,
I'm sure there's narcissistic women out there as well. But I'm wondering. I want to talk about what you do for the clients that you work with. What is it that you bring to them? How do you help them into recovery? I guess is kind of what how I'd phrase it, if that's phrased right.
well, again, just validating their experience, letting them talk about it. The most important way to get through trauma is to actually sit there with it and hold space for your feelings, because we cannot outrun them. If anything, they'll come back with a vengeance. So, as ugly and dark as it is and uncomfortable, we need to sit with those feelings. And what helped me, and what I help others with, is just going back there in detail. Like, try to remember what you were feeling, you could smell, like what you saw. Because by processing all of this, we can start to desensitize what's happened to us, and we start to realize that that past threat is no longer present in our life. We need to help women. I help women see that it's not their fault, and try to figure out why it is that they've stayed. And again, it's a very complex issue about why women stay. It says they say it takes 7 events for women to finally get out of abusive relationships. The scary thing is, in the post breakup period, that's the most dangerous time. A
Mhm.
lot of women end up getting murdered because the controller has lost control and
Yeah.
is now set out for revenge.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people don't leave because they don't want to break up the homes for the children. A lot of women wonder how they're going to pay the bills. So, financial control is the main reason that women stay in abusive relationships. And again, unless you've been in it, people think, well, you have it coming, or it's not that bad if you're staying. And everybody's situation is unique and different. And we just need to be there as much as we can for people going through this.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and obviously you know more people who've been in these relationships than I do, but I would imagine that a lot of these narcissists are able to, or purposely, become someone different when the friends and family are around. So they're not, behaving in an abusive way maybe when your friends and family are around. So they might be thinking, well, what's wrong? He seems so normal to me. He seems nice, he's providing well, he's this, he's that, the next thing. So would you say that that's kind of common, maybe that ability to be an actor when they need to be?
That is 1000%, in my opinion, the definition of a narcissist. They wear the mask, they pretend to be who people want them to be. They're able to morph depending on the crowd. My narcissist was a salesman, so he was fantastic at selling himself and charismatic and sweet and amazing. And when I was going through it, nobody believed me
Hmm.
because he was such a quote unquote honorable man. And he would do the smear campaign. So behind my back, he would tell my friends and family that I was crazy, that I was the one who needed help. And definitely, and the mask came off behind closed doors when nobody else could see it.
Yeah, and yeah,
Yep.
I experienced that myself for sure. So how do these women find you? I mean, are they referred to you, or how do they even know? I mean, I didn't realize there were trauma recovery coaches for specific things such as narcissistic relationships. So, I mean, how does a person come across that?
They are referred to me through a lot of talks that I've given. women will reach out to me afterwards and I will start counseling them. And then word of mouth.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. And do you meet in person or is this like a can you do virtual meetings and so on? How does that work?
Yep, I do both.
You don't. Okay. You don't have to be like local right to where you are. Well, that's good to know. So, well, I have really, as I mentioned before, we started recording, I learn something new every time I do one of these interviews. But is there anything else you'd like to share before we finish today?
Just know that you're worth it and there is a way to get out and heal and thrive. I suffered severe post-narcissistic stress disorder. Like I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't leave the house. I was just in hyper arousal the whole time. And through therapy and writing this book, I am the happiest and healthiest I've ever been in my entire life. So my huge message is that it is possible to break away.
Yeah. And it's good for you and your kids too. So,
Absolutely.
not just the kids,
Absolutely.
but both of you, you and the kids. Well, Faith, thank you so much for being my guest today. I have truly appreciated hearing what you have to say. And again, we'll link to your book because I'm myself going to make sure I pick it up. So I'm sure anybody else is listening that's interested in this topic, which unfortunately I'm sure there's a lot of us out there, would be interested as well. So thank you again.
Thank you so, so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.